Woulda, coulda, shouldas. It's always been a staple of human life. To look back at things that happened or things that didn't happen and say to yourself, man, I should have done it differently. Or I would have done it differently if I knew about X. Or I could have done it differently had I just seen things a different way. You want to know why sports betting is so difficult? You want to know why the stock market is tough to gauge? It's because hindsight doesn't exist for the future. Hindsight only helps us articulate what was in the past. And with this in mind, I wanted to go out there and talk about a bit of a hindsight conversation, as inspired by what Jeff Marek said on the new episode of his show, The Sheet, on the Nation Network from earlier this week. Take a look at this tweet posted by Flames Nation. Jeff Marek kicked off his new show, The Nation Network, The Sheet, with some Flames news. The Calgary Flames were one of 3 teams who were interested in offer-sheeting Dylan Holloway and Philip Broberg last summer. This clip was posted on December 2nd. It will be linked in the description. And in typical Jeff Marek fashion, he goes out there and talks about what this sort of idea reminds him of. It makes him think about the rivalries of the 80s, etc. between the Oilers and the Flames. But I wanted to dive into this idea here too. Because when you talk about these two players, obviously, Broberg and Holloway were both RFAs, and they were a part of the Oilers organization. They were pretty significant parts, I would say, too. Both first-round picks, and both guys that I think many Oilers fans and NHL fans saw long-term potential within. But both also were guys that the Oilers and Stan Bowman and Ken Holland just did not take advantage of as much as they could have, and they didn't even try to work things out salary-wise before the offseason began. There were opportunities to potentially do that, let's say in January or February of this year, but they didn't. And that ultimately bit them in the behind because you had teams like St. Louis going out there and tendering extremely good offers to these players. Offers that didn't really have that much compensation going back the other way. So to lose out on Broberg and Holloway for essentially seconds and third-round picks, it was a very big mistake from the Edmonton Oilers POV. It's just they could not really go out there and sign the guys to those contracts. They didn't really have the flexibility to do that. And of course, I think it shouldn't really be too surprising to hear that there were other teams that were interested in shelling out compensation and extra offer sheet dollars to get Broberg and Holloway onto their squads, but to hear that the Calgary Flames are one of them, yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense to me, and I wanted to dive into that here. So, of course, the Battle of Alberta, the big rivalry, everybody will talk about how these two teams hate each other. It's been like that for decades. But just going out there and acknowledging that the Calgary Flames are in a much different spot than Edmonton makes this entire idea flow a lot better. The Flames are a younger team than Edmonton. They have been intentionally trying to get younger. With all the trades they had made with Elias Lindholm and Nikita Zadorov and Noah Hanifin and Chris Tanev and Jacob Markstrom and Tyler Toffoli, yeah, that core has been shaken down all the way to the bone. And the only guys that are still left are, I guess you could say, Mackenzie Weegar, Rasmus Andersson, not to mention Mangiapane, Nazem Kadri, and Jonathan Huberdeau. All the other guys that were a part of that core, quote-unquote, so to speak, are gone. And they were all traded for younger pieces, draft picks, etc., etc. So the Flames have been trending towards that direction for a while now. And when you consider the fact that Dylan Holloway was a 2020 draftee, Philip Broberg was a 2019 draftee, these guys fit in that age range as to what the Flames were targeting. You also have to recognize that the Flames have been a lot better than people have expected them to be this season. They started out the year super hot. Jonathan Huberdeau was already scoring points again. They have kind of cooled down since then, but still, there's a lot of mojo and a lot of swagger with this Calgary Flames team. By no means are they the world beaters like they were a few years ago with Johnny Gaudreau, Tkachuk, and Elias Lindholm on the top line, but they're still doing pretty okay, reasonably well for what we thought they would be. They are a lot better than we thought they would be. So when you think about that progression, you think about how they've gotten slightly better, they've been exceeding expectations here in Alberta, you start to think, what could it have looked like if they really went through with the offer sheets? Let's assume maybe they shell out a few more dollars than St. Louis does. Because honestly, I think St. Louis, they went out there and capped themselves out. They maximized the amount of dollars they could send Broberg and Holloway in order to give the Oilers the least amount of compensation possible. If Calgary decided to go a little bit above that, let's just assume, I think only then you would have yourselves a chance for Broberg or Holloway to sign. The reason I think that is because if you had assumed, okay, let's say the dollar amounts are the same. The Blues offered Broberg 4 point whatever it was, I think it was 4.5, and then they offered Holloway 2.2. If the Flames offered those same dollar amounts, would they rather sign in Calgary or in St. Louis? Not to disrespect Calgary or anything, but I do think that there would be maybe even some inkling of, okay, we're getting the same money either way. Disregard taxes and all that. Would I rather go to a team in the Central or a team in Calgary? Which is just a rivalry to my Edmonton squad right now. If I go to Calgary, we're going to play off against Edmonton like 6 times a year. And if we go over to St. Louis, sure, we'll play Edmonton still, but it's not going to be as frequent. There's not going to be as much noise. Canadian market versus American market. I get it. The St. Louis Blues are a historical hockey team with a lot of relevance in the St. Louis, Missouri area. I'm not saying that they're not important. It's just the Calgary Flames, one of 7 Canadian organizations, and all Canadian media is torturous, right? So I could understand if there was some sort of a perspective from the players' POV, where they were like, okay, if I had to choose between Calgary or St. Louis, assuming the money is the same, maybe I go to St. Louis. So if we assume instead that Calgary offered more money, let's just assume they offered a little bit more. They had a higher compensation. Maybe Edmonton gets a second and a first rather than a third and a second for these two guys. What would it look like if Philip Broberg and Dylan Holloway were on the Calgary Flames? Well, I'll say this right now. I think they probably would get opportunities. That's definitely not a question here. These guys have been pretty solid young dudes, and I mean, Philip Broberg is under a point per game. He missed some time in St. Louis, but he still is under a point per game. And Dylan Holloway is on pace for 50 points this year. These two guys are both playing very well in the St. Louis Blues organization, and I think at this point, if the Calgary Flames were serious about offer sheeting these two, maybe they could be kicking themselves in the head about now. Just for reference, Philip Broberg, who recently returned to the St. Louis Blues lineup, is at 12 points in 15 games, on pace for 56 points over 70, because he did miss 12 games on the year already. He's bounced back with 3 points in his most recent 2 games since the start of December. Meanwhile, if we go over to Dylan Holloway, he has played every game for St. Louis so far, and in this 27-game sample, he has 16 points. So he has been fantastic, on pace, as we had said, for 48 points, almost 50 on the season. These two guys are very good players. They're finding their groove in St. Louis. They're being given opportunities to just do their thing. Dylan Holloway's second overall in St. Louis scoring, which is ridiculously good for them. My question all of a sudden is now, if these two were just on Calgary, how much better would they be? How much better would the Flames be? And what kind of impact would this have on that Battle of Alberta? I want you to let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about this Dylan Holloway, Philip Broberg, Jeff Marek scoop as to how the Flames were intending on offer sheeting these guys. What are your thoughts on the outcome? What are your thoughts on the players? Let me know what you think. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.